A few seconds now.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the last session of this conference. My name is Stefanie Plappert. I'm an exhibitions curator at DFF, Deutsches Film Institute and Film Museum here in Frankfurt, Germany. And I'm very happy to be the moderator of today's roundtable exhibiting images of the past. My sincere thanks goes to the team for organizing this wonderful conference. In today's last session, we are looking into different ways of exhibiting the past. All four of today's panelists will bring in their very own experiences and practices. And I'm looking very much forward to discussing these different approaches and perspectives from both research, art, and curation with all of you. Just a short technical note beforehand. I would suggest that direct questions on understanding what has been presented being asked right after the respective presentations. Everything else would be great to discuss after the fourth presentation, when we are hoping and waiting for your remarks and questions. So now, please allow me to introduce the participants in order of their appearance. The first on stage is Anna Baumgart, born in Wrocław, Poland. She is a multimedia artist who represents a feminist perspective focused on personal, often hidden problems and obsessions, also delving into the subject of the other. She works in video, installation, performance, sculpture, and artistic tattoo. She graduated from the Department of Sculpture of the Academy of Fine Art in Gdańsk in 1994. In 1995, she received the award of the city of Gdańsk for the most interesting debut. She has collaborated with the most important centers of the Polish artistic scene: Wyspa Gallery, Spisz 7 Gallery, Baltic Cultural Center, and CCA Ważnia. And she has taken part in numerous shows of Polish art at home and abroad. She obtained a number of grants and awards, and her works are part of museum collections within Poland and worldwide. Next up on our panel is Alina Popescu, who today serves as Secretary General for the International Federation of Film Distributors Associations, FIAT, after having worked as a policy advisor for FIAT since 2016. She has a broad range of experience dealing with audiovisual, copyright, publishing, and telecommunication issues, as well as other topics affecting the media industry. She also holds a BA in law from the University of Bucharest and an LLM in corporate and commercial law from Maastricht University. Her research interest, however, is dedicated to the history of Romanian cinema. She finished a thesis on censorship of Romanian fiction films during the communist period. And she is a researcher for the project Vintage Cere, documenting the work of Romanian documentary film studio Alexandru Cere online and tracing a very particular institution during the communist years. The third participant is Rinella Cere, an associate professor in media and cultural studies at Sheffield Hallam University. She has been researching film museums for the last 15 years, which has culminated in the publication An International Study of Film Museums, which just came out with Routledge in 2021, and covers a comparative approach of 5 different film-related institutions within Europe and the United States. She is currently co-investigator of a new European-wide funded project, Polyvocal Interpretation of Contested Colonial Heritage, which involves archival research of non-fiction film in colonial contexts. And the fourth participant is Kamil Lipinski, assistant professor at the University of Bialystok, with a particular interest in relationships between film and philosophy. He completed his PhD at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan on spaces of moving images. He was an editor for the journal Sensus Historiae. He's a runner-up in the 2019 Postgraduate Essay Prize granted by the Postcolonial Studies Association Journal of Postcolonial Writing, and he's the recipient of the unique graduate grant at Freie Universität Berlin and Adam Mickiewicz University in 2015-16. Kamil Lipinski has published on the philosophy of culture and visual media arts and on French theory. Together with Christine Ree Peters, Lipinski is co-chair of Next Film Philosophy Work Group. A very warm welcome to everybody. And now, please, Anna, the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for invitation once again, and I'm very pleased to be here with you. I'm starting my presentation with a brief statement. The terrain should be radically changed. Decolonializing memory, working through the trauma, thus learning to forget and boldly open to history, not to celebrate and reconstruct it, but to overcome the burden of the past. The first project I will show you is my found footage titled Synecdoche. Film, in my opinion, well shows my practice as a feminist archivist, who heroize the past, opening the way for ordinary oppressed and excluded subjects. In my projects, I always try to refer to knowledge and sensitivity, but also to the unconsciousness of the spectator. I wish to provoke question and situation in which the spectator produces knowledge and will develop his, her own interpretation on the what makes my work a kind of psychoanalyst practice. Now, please, Jakub, please play my first video.
J'ai tout vu, tout.
To nie mój dom. Uciekam przed Niemcami. Nie wiem, gdzie jutro będę.
Odnajdę cię, Joasiu. Na zawsze. Widzisz, Max? To jest całe nasze miasto. Wielokrotnie okupowane przez obcych, torturowane, zrównane z ziemią. Nasze miasto. Czasem w środku Europy, a kiedy indziej wschodnioeuropejskie. Popatrz. Te migotliwe drobiny światła to są znicze na miejscach straceń. Ostatni ślad po ludziach, których tak ciężko obcym zrozumieć.
Bo świat usiłuje zrozumieć tylko tych, którzy budują bomby wodorowe. Świat kocha siłę.
Les reconstitutions ont été faites le plus sérieusement possible. Les films ont été faits le plus sérieusement possible. L'illusion, c'est bien simple, est tellement parfaite que les touristes pleurent. On peut toujours se moquer. Mais que peut faire d'autre un touriste que justement pleurer?
A przecież zginął prezydent Polski. Rosjanie mogli dobijać rannych.
Takiej siły u nich nie.
Bij pod nogi na 5 kroków z całej siły. A potem biegnij do wyjścia.
Jestem gotowa. Nie będzie bito.
Des villes entières se mettent en colère. Contre qui? La colère des villes entières? La colère des villes entières, qu'elles le veuillent ou non, contre l'inégalité posée en principe par certains peuples contre d'autres peuples. Contre l'inégalité posée en principe par certaines races contre d'autres races. Contre l'inégalité posée en principe par certaines classes contre d'autres classes. Écoute, c'est 4 heures.
Pourquoi?
Je ne sais pas qui c'est. Tous les jours, il passe à 4 heures et il tousse.
As you saw, I edit a fragment of cult films by such directors as Tadeusz Konwicki, Alan René, Agnieszka Holland. I mix it with archival photos showing a man who burned himself in protest against the invasion of Czechoslovakia by Soviet troops in 1968. And I mix a speech by Polish right-wing activists during the demonstration after the accident in Smolensk, when a government plane fell and 100 Polish government officials died. The next film, Untitled Paragraph 1000, is of a box-in-a-box type. It contains 3 basic narrative layers. Each of them refers to different political systems: Nazism, communism, and democracy in the reconstructing Western Europe after the Second World War. The entry point, or the impulse for my project, occurred with the photos and text I found doing research in the archives of the Norwegian Memorial in Human Rights Center, the Falsat Center, where I worked at the invitation of the memory guardians. In my research, I reviewed the digitalized archival materials with special attention to the visual ones. As always, when working on a project, I again research for omission and gaps hidden behind the images, liquid picture, contiguous images, or third picture, according to idea of Didi Iberman. Since in history, what is hidden reveals itself only in secondary and apparently unimportant details, as it was formulated by a renowned philosopher of history and narrativist, Franklin Ankersmith. Eventually, a few photos caught my attention. Those were black and white photos. Could you please, because something happened with my, okay, yes. Those were black and white photos presenting a modest theater performance played exclusively by male actors. The photographs and history behind them become an impulse for a further investigation and subsequent development of my visual narrative. I wish to draw your attention to the peculiar moment outlined in my project of the encounter of the free political system understood as a internalized by individuals' various value system, and resulting from that encounter aparia concerning the limits of freedom of speech. Aparia may be one of the most important for the Western democracy in its present form. The narrative of the two-part film work can be summarized in the following way. In the winter of 1947, a team of Polish Film Chronicle arrived in Falstaff prison. The Chronicle is as a team of the official propaganda instrument of a young communist state. The PKF had filmed a New Year review prepared by Nazi functionaries located in the work camp and prison, right after the liberation of Norway. Ironically, that place had housed a camp for a Poles and political prisoners under Nazi occupation. So there occurred a reversal of the social and symbolic rules. The next gesture of reversal or twisting of meanings is centered in the above-mentioned review realized in the form of loosely related sketches and acts under a title of paragraph 1000. The Nazi made a reference of the paragraph 100 in the Norwegian constitution dealing with the freedom of speech. The review caused serious reservation of the Ministry of Justice inspector, who concluded that it promotes Nazi contents and he wanted to ban it. The prison head, Mr. Buk, did not agree to censor the performance. The whole situation was related by the Polish Film Chronicle. Of course, it is mockumentary, kind of mockumentary. And the interpretation was subjected to the rhetoric and propaganda objective, the critique of the Western democracy. Now please play the second.
Norwegia, kraj pięknej i dzikiej natury. Pokryte śniegiem przestrzenie budzą respekt dla ludu, który potrafił zagospodarować ciężką pracą tak nieprzychylne człowiekowi ziemię. Norwegia to kraj, który imperialistyczne siły doprowadziły na skraj zagłady. W 1940 roku Norwegię zajęły wojska hitlerowskiego okupanta. Gdy masy ludowe zaczęły tworzyć ruch oporu, zdegenerowane elity zdecydowały się na kolaborację z nazistowskim reżimem. Ochrona przywilejów okazała się ważniejsza niż honor ojczyzny. Dziś oczy postępowej ludzkości zwrócone są na państwo, w którym znów rządy objęła norweska partia pracy. Czy osądzi sprawiedliwie nazizm? Czy nie pozwoli, aby hydra tej zbrodniczej ideologii nie odrodziła się nigdy? Pokój i sprawiedliwość nie będą spokojnie się rozwijać, jeśli wojenni podżegacze nie otrzymają tego, na co zasłużyli. Faszyzm niemiecki został pokonany. Jednak niedobitki znalazły możnych protektorów. Narody miłujące pokój nie pozwolą na nowe obozy zagłady. Przyszłość świata to pokój i socjalizm, które zakwitną w ostatecznej klęsce światowego faszyzmu pod każdą postacią w każdym kraju. Oto ludzie, którzy zhańbili ziemię norweską i jej wielką historię. Przyjrzyjmy się im dobrze. Skąd znamy te butne nordyckie twarze? Każdym gestem chcą podkreślić swoją wyższość. Chyba jeszcze nie wiedzą, że czas na człowieka się skończył. Zajął go człowiek pracy. Żmudnie wykuwający świetlaną przyszłość kraju i narodu. Czy winni zdrady zostaną rozliczeni z hańbiącej historii? Czy sprawiedliwość ludowa dotarła już do Norwegii? Oto pytanie, które musi sobie postawić każdy gość odwiedzający ten kraj. Szczególnie jeśli pochodzi z ziemi, w której okupant budował piece Oświęcimia. Przyjrzyjmy się procesom norweskich nazistów. Ilu z nich spotka sprawiedliwa kara? Polska kronika filmowa odwiedziła więzienie w Falstad. Najpierw dom poprawczy, potem obóz dla więźniów politycznych. Przede wszystkim komunistów, którzy ginęli tu za ojczyznę i socjalizm. Po wojnie obóz zmieniono w państwowy zakład karny. To tu osadzeni zostali oprawcy faszyzmu norweskiego. Żeby szybciej pozbyć się swoich ohydnych cech, pozwolono założyć im nawet teatrzyk. Podobno wystawiają sztuki, które pokazują, że włączyli się w nurt przemian dziejowych, które doprowadziły do rozgromienia faszyzmu. Czy na pewno? Wydaje się, że zbrodniarze wojenni zamiast odbywać karę dobrze się bawią. Oto piekarz wytwarza żywność dla robotników i chłopów Norwegii. Tworzy nowe jutro kraju, który tak bardzo doświadczyła wojna. Ale czy na pewno? Dobrze znamy te gesty. Widzieliśmy je nieraz w noc faszystowskiej okupacji. A to co? Z pieca wychodzi postać Żyda. Dla norweskich aktorów jest jak zawsze krwiożercza i bezlitosna. Żywcem przypomina karykatury z nazistowskiego szmatlawca. Widocznie przedstawiciele rasy panów nic nie zrozumieli z tragedii milionów Żydów, których nazywano podludźmi. Zgnilizna, sadyzm, pornografia. Czy na pewno osadzeni w Falstad zmienili się? Czy grają na nosie ludowi norweskiemu? Czy to nie woda na młyn niemieckich planów odwetowych? Ale oto pojawia się dyrektor więzienia. Dyskutuje z więźniami o kolejnych scenach i niestety nic się nie zmienia. Nie zabrania występu. Przeciwnie, wydaje się popierać spektakl. Sztuka nadal jest grana przez zadowolonych z siebie faszystów. Jak długo praca dywersyjna będzie się odbywać pod płaszczykiem wolności słowa? Jak długo będą padać słowa, które jeszcze niedawno doprowadziły do śmierci milionów niewinnych ludzi? Tu, w więzieniu w Falstad, owoce zwycięstwa nad faszyzmem stają pod znakiem zapytania. Jeszcze raz przyjrzyjmy się tym twarzom. Buta nazistów nic się nie zmieniła. To, co można zobaczyć w więzieniu, to wstrząs dla każdego człowieka, który pamięta niedawne piekło wojny. Polegli w walce z faszyzmem, przekazali nam testament. Musimy wzmocnić pracę agitacyjną.
So I'm over my time, yes? No? So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Alina Popescu. Unless anybody has a very urgent question about what Anna just presented. Sorry. I forgot to mention how to ask questions, which is best done through the Facebook commentary section, if I understand correctly. These will be transmitted to me afterwards. Doesn't seem to be the case, so please.
So I can go now. Okay. Thank you for having me here, and hello to everybody. It is a pleasure and a great context to present a project in which I'm involved, Sahia Vintage, dedicated to the non-fiction film production in Romania during the communist period. Sahia Vintage has been initiated several years ago by an NGO, One World Romania, and #1 specialist in the history of Romanian documentary film, Adina Brădeanu, who is a film scholar. And over the years, the project meant screenings of Sahia films in high schools, universities, neighborhoods, several cities in Romania, or during the human rights documentary festival organized by One World Romania. It meant also editing several DVDs with the selection from thousands of films produced by Sahia during its 4 decades of existence. And it also means recently a platform and a Facebook page dedicated in connection with this platform. I would like to mention that we collaborate and support many NGOs who organize public screenings with Sahia films with the hope that to inspire or to inform civic actions. And that 5 DVDs edited until now are available in bookstores, and also we have offered them for free to Romanian and foreign universities and research centers and libraries. Nevertheless, we came to the conclusion that this support will become very soon obsolete. Therefore, we have created also an online platform dedicated to the specific film production. We hope that through the platform and the Facebook page to reach maybe more democratically a wider audience, more accustomed to new technologies, maybe young people, and an audience abroad across the borders. Therefore, we also made the platform available in English as well as the DVDs, who offer fragments of Sahia films and text who contextualize them. What I want to emphasize is that this project represents a consistent and unique effort to recover, make accessible, and promote a valuable film heritage. The whole project is intended to be an educational and informative tool, but also a research tool regarding the history of Romania during several decades of communism and the history of Romanian documentary film. It is also meant to raise awareness regarding the importance and fragility of the archives. I would like to give now a few information about the history of the studio before taking you on a visit through the platform. So Sahia Studio was the main media institution of the communist regime, the only studio in Romania specialized in documentary films, and now is the main non-fiction film archives. The studio was established at the beginning of the regime, communist regime, in the 1950s, and I would like to mention that the film production was split during that time in animation, documentary, and fiction film, each one having its own studio. And Sahia produced hundreds of short films per year, from newsreels to film documenting the accomplishments of the regime, or films commissioned by other institutions such as the police, the Ministry of Education, and so on. The result is a variety of genre and style, and inevitably, despite this variety, the studio has been associated with the official perspective of the regime, since the film production had to comply with the propaganda agenda. And meanwhile, documentaries were mainly screened in cinemas, and therefore they are remembered by many people as propaganda film or as films that were screened before real films. Actually, most of them were short films of 10 to 20 minutes length, and as as I said, they were shown in film theaters before fiction films. For a long period after 1990, after the collapse of the communist regime, the studio has no longer produced films and has been completely invisible, while the archival documents are still unavailable. The films are preserved by the National Film Archives, but still the access of the public is difficult. So this project, Sahia Vintage, is filling this gap in our cultural space where the circulation of these films is still insufficient. Some of them has been forgotten. Some are, for the younger public, they are completely new. But it's certain that there is an urgent need to preserve the film heritage in the context where the National Film Archive is lacking human or financial resources to do it. I will show you now how the platform is structured with the help of Jakob. So the title, it's Sahia Vintage, a digital history platform of documentary films produced at Sahia. Sahia is the name of a journalist very attached to the Marxist ideas, while vintage, it's a reference, an obvious reference to the past. Currently, the platform includes a history of the studio, fragments of films, which are limited to 2 to 4 minutes because of the copyright restrictions, text and basic information to contextualize them, a timeline, and a map on which these films are positioned. So the content is structured in 3 main entry points, and the navigation is possible with the help of tabs. So beside the main page that offers elements on the history of the studios and information about the project, films are placed on a timeline that emphasizes key moments from the studio history and the history of the communist Romania. A visitor can choose films depending on the interest for a certain period and has elements to contextualize them. For instance, one can see what happened. Also, these navigations offer information about the links with the fiction film. So a visitor can get information about what happened in the cultural field at a certain period of time, and also what happened politically. So in order to better situate a specific documentary film. It is also possible to navigate geographically. We have placed films on a map that gives a visual representation of the places preferred or accessible to the documentary filmmakers. As you can see, Bucharest is overrepresented because the studio Sahia was based in Bucharest. And finally, a user can do a thematic exploration through the keywords. We have grouped films and fragments, actually, more specifically, under the umbrella of a few keywords such as work, housing, censorship, and so on. In order to show this variety of subjects, this film production, which cannot be limited to propaganda and censorship. We also developed a blog component where visitors can read texts written by various artists, university teachers, scholars, PhD students, or other specialists who use the platform in their activities. And we hope to that in this way to enlarge the perspective about Sahia. We also got an excellent feedback through the Facebook page that we have launched 2 years ago. People are writing us in order to find out more about some films they know, about people, about the former brands of the communist era and so on. There are many questions they address via the Facebook page. So in conclusion, our aim was to create a platform that allows the creation of new connections between films, the historical context of their production, and the production culture of the studio Sahia, without imposing a reading constraints on such a sensitive topic, which is subject to many debates and memorial negotiations, and to open the discussion about how we relate to the communist past. So we wanted assumed fragmented version of this history that could facilitate dialogue and research. So I will stop here, but I'm looking further to the questions in order to give other details. So thank you.
Thank you also very much. Next up on the podium would be Rinella. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I will start to mute. Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you very much to the team of Victory for inviting me. I am so impressed by the amazing array of archival research and projects, films presented at this conference. I've definitely learned a lot, and I am truly humbled. Probably my work that I talk about today doesn't quite fit into the conference quite neatly, because it's actually about film museums. Although obviously we can't talk about film museums without talking about archives. When I embarked on this project many years ago, I was trying to answer the questions really about the paradox of exhibiting cinema in a museum, what has been described as already been exhibited. It was something that it was a kind of a discussion that was going on between myself and some of my students. Anyway, what I didn't know when I embarked on this is that I actually came up against a very complex and tortuous histories. Probably was a bit naive on my part at the time, but also, of course, history that began as early as cinema itself. The 5 museums in questions that I actually ended up looking at, and of course, this, as has been mentioned by many, this is also a question of language competency, because you can't enter archives, do interviews unless you have a language. So in the end, I only did 5 case studies. Well, only took about 15 years to do, amongst other things I was doing. And these are the list, but the arrow doesn't work, and I'm not sure why. I was going to go on to the next slide. Oh, here we are. Maybe no. no. Jakub might be able to help. Oh, there we are. The 5 museums in question are the National Science and Media Museum in Bradford, obviously in the UK, where I reside. The Cinémathèque Française, Musée du Cinéma in Paris, the Museo Nazionale del Cinema in Turin, the Museo del Cinema in Girona, Catalonia, a rather kind of a new arrival on the museum scene, on the film museum scene, and Eastman House, an international museum of photography and cinema. Now, obviously, you know, in this session, I won't be able to talk about all these museums, and I thought I'll just do something different and just talk about a little extract from actually chapter 1 of that work, which is about the archives, because as I said, you know, in fact, you know, Film Museum often followed the establishment of the archives. That is to say, they were first and foremost archive. The other thing I want to say is that when I was doing this research, I realized that, of course, this was not just about film, the museums of cinema. It was about its archaeology, technology, cinephilia, festivals, archives, of course, and libraries, art and cultural heritage, and even kind of auditoriums, architecture. So this conference in some way has added to that list in its attempt to kind of show how the content of archives act as a temporal and spatial marker in the creation of public spheres. So what I'm going to talk about, you know, the kind of archives and how the idea of the archive came about. So it's kind of a bit of an institutional historical piece, because the very first idea of conserving and exhibiting the photographic and cinematographic heritage was by a Polish photographer and camera operator for the Lumiere brothers, Boleslaw Matuszewski, and the publication of a short piece of his, which was written in French, Une nouvelle source de l'histoire. Again, I don't know why my arrow doesn't work. So please, Jakub, could you move the I really don't know. Thank you. Just move, if you could move the slides for me, thank you. I'm obviously completely incompetent here. Une nouvelle source de l'histoire, a new source of history, where he advocated for the importance of what Cousin and MacDonald called the documentary possibilities of cinema, and of course the need to safeguard for posterity through a systematic depository. And it's to this man that we all kind of, this idea of the archive and the depository. This is what he says. The issue now is to give this perhaps privileged source of historical evidence the same authority, official existence, and accessibility as other already well-established archives. All themes that we have heard throughout the conference, really, the question of official existence, authority, accessibility. Intrinsic, of course, in this pronouncement are the two of the strands in film history and theory. Film has really social document, and film has equivalent cultural and historical form to other arts. I won't go into the first strand about, you know, kind of really social document, which has kind of had received a lot of attention from Bazin onwards, as you probably all know in this conference. But I want to move on to the second strand formulated by Matuszewski, which is in connection with cinema's legitimacy and status. Which argue for ways in which it could achieve, of course, a greater standing alongside, you know, as I said, literature and the plastic arts, and how this could then be realized through those three processes: authority, official existence, and accessibility. The need for this indicated the cinema status was, of course, you know, this was literally at the beginning of cinema, as birth of cinema, was still seen as marginal or to other more established cultural bourgeois forms. Through the idea of introducing, you know, its collection and preservation, a process which had been already intrinsic to the birth of the public museum institutions of the 19th centuries, for example, as creators of social space and spaces of representation, as described by Bennett in his Birth of the Museum, the cinema was perceived as acquiring a parallel cultural status. If cinema was worth collecting and preserving for posterity, it would require an institution, and of course the archive was such a thing, a library, or a museum, or even all three combined, as I found out in my research, and as is now evident, in many examples around the world. I mean, again, a model presented in this conference by Tone Forland Glam added, of course, the gallery to it as well in her paper that she gave on accountable access to digitized non-fiction film heritage, which I found really interesting. Matuszewski, like many other people working in early photography and cinema, offered his own documents as a launch for his future film achievement, for his future film archive and museum. And I just wondered if Jakub could move the slides along for me, because I for some reason my arrow is not working. I think that we have already, if you can move another 2 slides along, please, after this one, I think we've passed it. Apologies about this, and I don't know why it's not working, my arrow. Oh, well, then you've gone too far, but anyway, not to worry. As I was saying, Matuszewski was offering his own document as a launch for this future film archive museum. And that's what he says, I quote, "I offer this not an interesting series of cinematographic exposures as the basis for the establishment of the new museums." Of course, he was the official, prior to working for the Lumiere brothers, he was the official photographer of the Emperor of Russia, and he had many such documents to offer a future archive. The photographic and cinematographic archive of the Romanov was used extensively by Esfir Shub in her first documentary, The Fall of the Romanov Dynasty. Interestingly, it was also mentioned, this first compilation documentary was also mentioned yesterday by Jamie Barron in her talk. He also had great hope that people, professional and amateurs, would follow in his footsteps. And again, this is what he says. "My example will be imitated." We're actually on the right slide, so that's great. "If you are so good as to encourage this simple but new idea, making suggestions of your own to improve it, and above all, giving it the wide publicity it needs to thrive and be fruitful." I'm always moved by this, by the modesty of this pioneer, really, of archives. Of course, after a century of professionalization around cinema, there is increasingly a case being made for a return of the amateur filmmaking, and we have heard a great deal about it in this conference, for example, from Paolo Simoni on home movies and the Archivio Nazionale di Famiglia in Bologna. This is obviously spurred by the digital-led transformation of media use, which we have been talking about, you have been talking about throughout this conference. And also there's been an increased emphasis on the preservation of amateur audiovisual materials around the world, and Fricks in particular talks a great deal about that. Matuszewski's view on the uncontestable and absolute truth revealed by the cinematographer, or his views that the latter is the epitome of the truthful and infallible eyewitness, quote, has not much currency, perhaps in an era where the epistemological and semiological foundations, I have to be, honestly, the phone went off, I'm so sorry. Where was I beg your pardon about this. Okay, so it has not much currency today where the epistemological and semiological foundation of history have been perhaps put a little into doubt. Nonetheless, his other ideas about the depository has become essential to the development of film archives and museums of cinema alike. In particular, of course, his concept of conservation and ensuring public access to film sources singles him out as a pioneer of both film history, film archives, and the musealization, of course, of what is being called the seventh art. There are others who I mention in the book who contributed very early on to the idea of establishing a film archive and library, but I don't have space to talk about them here. For example, D.W. Griffiths and Vashul Lindsay in the United States, in 1915. Jakub, could you move the slide along, please? I'll be grateful. That's the slide that we had on earlier. Anyway, the first physical manifestations of these ideas were actually not realized until much later, until the 30s. And crucially, when cinema was at an important historical juncture, sound had replaced silent film and fundamental change was taking place. What Cere in his book, The Death of Cinema, described as 30 years of silent movies becoming suddenly the past, a discrete stock of history. And of course, film conservation connected with the nature of the material of the time up to the 50s, which of course employed nitrocellulose, a highly inflammable and unstable substance, as evidenced in many of the museums that I've studied, where there was many fires involving nitrocellulose stock. Many deposits were actually lost either to fires, but also neglect or natural aging process. And we have heard some of that in one or two papers in this conference. The wholesale dumping of silent movies has been one of the explanations behind the effort to establish film archives in the 30s. However, not everybody kind of agrees with it or say that there was just one factor tied to it. For example, Houston has argued that the film archives took their character from national attitudes to cinema, methods of fundings, view about public service. Even more, they reflected the tastes and passion and working methods of the people who created them. And here I want to emphasize this last remark by Houston about the people who created them, because it's especially important as archives, like cinema museums and cinematheques were not on the whole, and with few exceptions, state-sanctioned affairs, but individual endeavors which were gathering momentum and which would eventually harness some limited state support. Again, kind of Caroline Frick, for example, although acknowledging the importance of Houston work, she takes a bit of a different view on this, and she argues that Houston's book operates with a paradigm that views moving images as accepted vital components of national cultural heritage, a paradigm which goes on to argue is imbued at quote with notion of sanctioned cultural value, protection, ownership, and power against, for example, what she calls the library, which denotes access and education, as well as the prioritization of the sharing and circulation of cultural material. In the first chapter of the book, I actually talk at length about the first archives before I launch into the actual case studies and the establishment of the museums. And the very first film archive was actually the Swedish Film Archive, which was established in 1933. Jakub, if you could move the list, I mean, there is a list of all those archives, coming up. This was followed by what have been called the Big Four, which went on to establish the International Federation of Film Archives, of course, an organization which is still very active today. The Big Four were respectively the Museum of Modern Art, Film Library in New York, the National Film Library in London, the Rijksfilm Archive in Berlin, and the Cinémathèque Française in Paris. Here I just was to signal briefly that the only one that was different was actually the Rijksfilm Archive, which was an approved state archive, well supported and subsidized, part of the political project of National Socialism. The Third Reich had a keen sense of the importance of film for the consolidation of the National Socialist project, and the Rijksfilm Archive was consequently moved under the jurisdiction of the Propaganda Ministry and away from what was the Rijksfilmkammer. Nonetheless, aside, the Rijksfilm Archive, many early archives and libraries were on the whole spontaneous affairs with many different national setups, but what they all had in common was an awareness that looking after films and cinema heritage in general was a very costly and time-consuming activity. As Houston rightly claimed, there was no such thing as a typical film archive. And I found the same about the museums. There is no such thing as a typical film museum. And if you get a chance to read the book, and if you're interested, you will see that just in those 5 case studies, which is a minuscule amount of film museum, you will see how different they all are, both in their histories, development, and current organization. The early archive efforts, the very existent, in fact, are today seen by some as fundamental to contemporary digital developments and an important driving force in the global media economy, according to Heidegger, who was on yesterday, and are increasingly part of the move to content on demand, which is in turn part of the wider process, of course, of what has been reserved as mining the archive. I always had a bit of a problem about using that word in relation to archive myself, but I won't go into that now. Now, of course, this conference called Migrating the Archives. I think, I'm not sure if I'm okay for time, because I have, am I okay for time? I didn't check the.
Well, I think if you're done and could wrap it up, it would be wonderful.
Okay. So in our digital age, the setting often envisages of unlimited availability and access for user, even bypassing, of course, film specialists and archivists, and we've seen many examples in this conference as well. The perceived easiness associated with the transformation of previous audiovisual formats into digital codifications, and hence potential unlimited online access has created, of course, new tensions. We have heard plenty in this conference about that, between public and private, and we've heard a lot about the ethical questions around that, private and the markets as well. But of course, the archives and museums are not the only ones to have large film stocks. There is also kind of the many of the major media corporations, as we know, they have a large libraries and film stock. But I suspect that's where the similarities actually end. And I'm going to end there because, I think I've taken up my time, and I have got a lot more things to say, but I'll be grateful, Jakub, if you could show maybe the last slide, which has a few references on, and maybe people can look at them at some other time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rinella. And I think we'll have the opportunity to talk about many of the things you said in relation to the other presentations after the upcoming next and last presentation for this panel, which is by Kamil. Please unmute yourself.
I'm here.
Hello, my name is Kamil Lipinski, and today I will talk about which I find interesting in terms of the way how we could bridge the past and present. The purpose of this topic is to illustrate the complexity of visits by Jewish local communities and inward. In the multiprint project Letters to Afar from 2013 by Peter Forget and Esma, who had prepared music. Well, I will on the question of the return of the Jews after Poland gained independence, regained independence, which consists in restoring and establishing archives of found footage amateurs as a part of installations that addresses the nomadism of the population. By a post-moral effect of these traces, these events present the specificity of the shadows. It's shadow.
Okay, we seem to encounter.
So,
okay.
Okay, I'm really sorry. So once again, I would by evoking efforts of trade and of the museum of 05 to the end of September 2013. Well, in other words, I wish I could. This movie is very specific for two reasons. Because each of these installations provides a glimpse of Jewish immigrants in interwar Poland who returned to their Polish homeland to visit relatives with portable cinema cameras. It is also a kind of visual documentation that bears witness to the old homes of the travelers so that they can see them in their new homes. This type of travelogue shows the possibility of buying a new Cine Kodak in the early 20s as their cost increases with the half price of the Model T automobile. Enriching the space with comparisons, these portable, let's say, documentaries have been unveiled from archival testimonies in the form of installation enriched with historical films such as The Banner of Freedom in Polish Sztandar Wolności from 1935 by Ryszard Ordyński, devoted to the struggle for the independence of the Second Polish Republic from 1905 to 1920, and the film adaptation of the Yiddish play by Stefan Anski entitled The D-Book from 1937 by Michał Waszyński. In the area of archival modernization, selected clips have been taken from original films, creating reminiscences of the shadows scattered between those who have traveled and their return to the United States in the interpassage of screens that display the same footage, but spinning it at different speed or viewing it from different angles. Looking back at Peter Forgacz's early works, one may note that they effectively inaugurated the use of home movies as found footage in the late 1970s Hungary. More specifically, his first video, I See That I Look from 1978, can be considered as the starting point of this innovative technique, focused on the tensions between collective and personal historical narratives. Forgacz, let's say, archive fever began when he established the Private Photo and Film Archives Foundation in 1983 in Budapest. Since then, Forgacz has been studying 20th century Hungarian visual collection as an outset of institutionalization of collective memory. Forgacz first experimented his technique with private archives from the 1930s. The author gathered more than 300 hours of home movie footage, then collecting an additional 40 hours of interviews provided by amateur filmmakers and shot in their anachronistic format of 9.5 millimeters. Forgacz himself then filmed the relatives and friends of the individuals who shot the original footage. Let's note that the dynamics established by his work with found footage imply a new dimension of speed and produce a new structure of event and, let's say, spectrality. Among the results of disclosing time as a pure form of documentary filmmaking are revenant effects triggered by the use of specific techniques of cutting, slow motion, freeze framing, and narrative ellipses. But why do I tell it? But because, well, in particular, I wish I could speak about very a great number of elements that which helped us to see this very particular exhibition. First of all, is the fact that it was an exhibition which was a partnership in between Museum of History of Polish Jews and the Vivo Institute for Jewish Research in New York. Well, till 1925, this institute was established and was gathering necessary Jewish documentation in Poland, but in 1940 it was moved to New York. What's more, in this movie, in this installation, we could see 12 amateur film documentaries, which are presented at the eastern part of current Poland, and also they also are presented in Belarus. So, in other words, we could see very different films. On one hand, they are closely knit with, let's say, with Jewish communities. Most of them are let's say, community oriented, and they show, let's say, American emigre who came to Poland. Also, what I have noticed during the analysis of these movies, that they were taken and filmed for marketing reasons, because let's say, in the case of Kolbuszowa film in 1929, the movie has been afterwards projected and screened in different places in order to gather money which could help the community living in Poland. Also, we could see different different situations of philanthropy, the ways how, let's say, David Shapiro came to Poland, and he helped his, let's say, hometown to, let's say, to reawaken the Jewish community. He has given many donations to each of the person who has asked. Not only he has bought, let's say, a Torah book for the priest, but also he established a fund for new marriages, and every marriage could have received $20 for whenever they took marriage. And also, it's very interesting that you can see the establishment of contact in between, let's say, Poland, Polish Jewish groups, and the American ones. Because if you could write, if one of the community member could write to Shapiro afterwards, he could have received $20 by mail. Well, in general, the most probably important film in these 12 movies, which comes from the very different collections, namely New York, second, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. It's also Steven Spielberg Film and Video Archive. Third, Beth Hattefuts in Tel Aviv, and fourth, the National Film Library in Warsaw. So let's say, in order to prepare this very specific installation, we've been trying to create a kind of diasporic vision of Jewish society, which somehow tries to recover via old past. We could say that in this movie we have two aspects. One is secular, and the second it would be, let's say, sacral. If we say that what is secular, I would say that these are very specific Landmannschaften. This is urban life, the ways how we could observe the daily life of observed Jewish communities, the small children going to the school, also, let's say, some people who are, let's say, living in the suburbs, and they have to work in order to, let's say, gain some money. But on the other hand, we see also, let's say, the screens of, let's say, and the of the sacral life whenever they go to the synagogue and they attend the mass. So also a very important aspect which has been filmed is also the, let's say, Jewish cemetery. In almost like 3 or 4 movies, we can notice, let's say, very specific Jewish life in the Jewish cemetery, when we observe Jewish matzevas and the ways how the people just take care of our, let's say, family who has already gone. Probably the most important in this movie is the ways how we could, let's say, show this encounter of let's say, American point of view and let's say rural people or the urban life who is trying to, let's say, gain some money, or let's say try to find the same language with the people who came back to let's say to their hometowns and have. So this is the reason why most of these people, they were created in order to, let's say, help the small communities in a particular town, such as Zaręby Kościelne in Warsaw, Krakow, Kałuszyn, Kolbuszowa, Kamionka, Skidl, Vilnius, Łódź, Warsaw, Grudek, Ośmianie, Kurowie. They in Vilnius, like Warsaw. So most of these towns, they had very, in the interwar period, very developed Jewish communities, and the point was to, let's say, to show, let's say, all these movies in very sentimental, nostalgic view. So why I'm calling it shadows? Because of 2 reasons. Why is that? It's very, let's say, nostalgic trouble, which is based on, let's say, almost photographic journey into the past when we just observe it in the slow motion. And the second is that why, because of let's say, technical or formal reasons. Forgach is an old neo-avant-garde filmmaker who was working in the Bela studio. He was mainly, he's, let's say, trying to see all these documents in different constellations, in different juxtapositions, and he shows it in different, let's say, temporalities. Mostly he has seen it and he has showed it in triptychs, but we could see in a few of them also diptychs. So why he is using it? In order to see, to show it how they go from the center. So it would be called, let's say, a mirror image. They are also, let's say, slightly changed, there are some temporal alternation in between them. So he tries to, let's say, show or duplicate or even multiply the same image in order to show how they reflect the reality of these days. And also he sometimes uses some very specific filters, namely, let's say, sepia, but also, let's say, black and white. I have noticed also, let's say, the effects of shadowing, and also he sometimes tries to, let's say, invert the movie in order to show it in the negative, as we see it in some of the photographs. So it's a very specific combination, which is enriched not only with, let's say, very different, let's say, shadow techniques, but it also is enriched with the words, with the commentaries, mostly the letters which has been written by the authors of these movies to or by let's say the local community members who has been addressing them to the, let's say, to the authors of the music to the authors of these films in order to help them. So the main commentaries which we hear is something which helps us to narrate, to express, and to, let's say, explain what we see. Because sometimes without a very specific narrative and illustrations, we cannot really understand what is seen. But let's say, thanks to this, I wouldn't say manipulation, but thanks to this, let's say, how to say, a pre-recorded commentary, we can just try at least enter into the historical background, which is necessary to understand. So I would say that if you would like to just, they are interested, especially if you are interested in the, let's say, ethnographic movie, which, or let's say the sociological movie of with a historical background, because in this case you could notice some very particular, let's say, aspects of Jewish life which are brought back into the presence in the new ways using, let's say, shadow techniques. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your presentations, for your insights in your academic and artistic work. As we are running slightly out of time, I just think a very short debate would be great. What I found interesting in your work, or what combines all of your work, is that it all takes place at the crossroads of film as an object and an artistic, political, educative means or creation. And you are all dealing, of course, given the objectives of the research project, with past images. I found it interesting that also both Anna and Alina actually mentioned their interest, or their special interest, for the gap in between historical narration, and that all of you seem, of course, are driven by the interest in a relation to the past. We do actually have a question from the audience, which is addressed to Alina Popescu by Perrine Wall from the Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne. Sorry. And the question reads as this: thanks a lot for your presentation and congratulations on the Sahia Vintage achievements. Do you already have feedback from viewers about the platform? And could you please tell us more about the next steps of the project? So please, Alina.
Thank you, Perrine, for these questions. We were, we've met several years ago in France, so I know Perrine, and hello, and thank you for this question. We do collect a lot of feedback via the Facebook page. we were not confident at the beginning when we launched the Facebook page dedicated to the HERA project, but actually it's a very, very good idea because people do share content, which is consists mostly in informations about the film and films that are on the platform. And they do write us back, saying that it's a great idea. That we have made this available, and I have the chance to compare, the public from the public screenings in Bucharest, and the public from the audience that access this content via Facebook or this platform, and the conclusion is that we really managed to reach a wider and more diverse audience, and generally they also ask questions about where to find the films in their integrality, because we only offer some fragments of these films because of the copyright limitation. They also ask informations about filmmakers, about the specific film they know about but they didn't see, about a film that we made available. They ask or they tell us about people that worked at the studios HERA or that were filmed by the filmmakers. Also, they ask that we make available some specific films, mostly related to the communist industry that no longer exists. That's interesting because they had parents or relatives that worked there, or I don't know, for many reasons. And while regarding the plans for the future, we would like to add some more diverse content, such as photography, which is quite difficult to find, actually. Documents related to the films and the studio. As I mentioned before, the document archives is not available, but we can find information in other archives, such as the Communist Party archives or other places. And we would like to make this platform more interactive, so that people can write comments or this feedback or their memories related to the those films, and to make more films available if possible. We are limited by the financial resources and bureaucratic constraints.
But what you're basically saying is that you're bridging also a generational gap in knowledge about the past, when you say that it's also transgressing family generations, so to say. Mm-hmm. As you all, have different or very diverse ways of dissemination or of presenting historical images from the past to probably also very diverse audiences, I would, just to round it up a bit, ask all of you to maybe elaborate on your experience with perception, with audience response on your respective projects. So the projects you've presented, how were they embraced or maybe also criticized by an audience? Do you know anything about that? Maybe we can start with Anna and then go to Kamil. Anna, you need to unmute yourself, the microphone.
it depends of project, of course. I realize many projects with history and past, and for example, a project Untitled 1000. It was difficult to work with archival materials, with archives, because their memory guardians were very not feel safety with my work, and they think that it's dangerous maybe. But the most difficult project was Fresh Cherries. It's devoted the former prostitution in Nazi camp, concentration camp in Second World War. So this is a project which was very difficult, and it was very difficult and dangerous ask about this phenomenon, because it is still full of secrets and silence. If we have a little bit more time, I can show you the short fragment of this project, Fresh Cherries.
I'm not sure about the time, but maybe you could still go a bit into how was the film, when you actually managed to make it, how was it received by audiences? Did you get any feedback on that?
You mean about paragraph 1000?
No, about the prostitution film. You were just the cherry. You were just.
How I say, it was difficult because my question about proof. It is possible that there in Falstaff exactly were proof. Such a question was a very problematic. That I can't ask these people, these women, former prisoners, about this aspect of his they be in prison, you know. So this is a difficult question, and I can't answer simply how it was, how was react. It was not so easy to say it. It was ambivalent, I can say.
Okay, totally understand. So maybe to hand it over to Kamil and the project by Forgach. Do you have any information about audience response to this? In a way, it's a double-layered project. It probably has more layers than that, but the material itself already speaks to ways of historical reconstruction. Maybe you can say something about response.
Okay. I will try as much as I can. However, it's quite. So far I was working with several different projects, which with Forgach about, and I also interviewed him a few years ago in 2017. I have made 2 interviews regarding, let's say, on one hand his works and let's say the whole history behind it. But let's say one interview I've lost with my mobile phone. The second, how it was published in Illuminates journal in Prague. What I can say is that Forgach well, this project is well received, critically well received, as far as I know. I mean, I've been in 2016. I took part in one of the conference organized in the Museum of Jews in Warsaw, where I encountered that I was trying to interview people who were let's say preparing this installation. However, I haven't seen it really in original let's say presentation. I haven't been there, let's say, in 2013. What I have and what I'm analyzing now is, let's say, an audiovisual content, because Forgach gave me all his movies, and he asked me just to work with them. So basically, I can see, let's say, the whole material, how it is presented. Well, and what I can say is, from the point of view of curatorship, he was trying to, let's say, use that triptych structure, and so he showed them these movies not only in, let's say, in vertical way, but also frontally, let's say vertically, so that they have used the whole, let's say, the big space, which was quite amazing, because as far as I know, he also, since there were not only amateur home movies, which I was trying to, let's say, briefly present, but also there were also two well-known Polish films. One is The Book, from 1937, and the second is the Bar of Freedom from 1935. So, as far as I understood, you could have entered into, let's say, go upstairs in order to see these two movies, which somehow tries to show how sacral it is, especially the book, because it's a kind of movie which is about the, let's say, about the possession by the ghost, and let's say the exorcism. So it's deeply enrooted in the Jewish tradition, and as far as I understood, the whole structure of this installation, when you had to enter when you had to go upstairs, it reflected, let's say, the holy, the sacral, the sacral status of this movie, because it was, let's say, from the vertical point of view, at the highest podium, while the other amateur movies was on the first, let's say, on the first stage. So I haven't been there, but let's say I was trying to analyze the architecture of this, let's say, of this collection, and based on some other views of people who has been there, it was, let's say, critically acclaimed. I cannot say more. What I have noticed is that last year, before pandemia, in 2019, I went to one of his, let's say, new projects, which has been presented at in the Ludwig Museum during the exhibition, collective exhibition devoted to death of internet, about the situation which would happen after a political situation, when all of a sudden there would be no internet anymore. So he was trying to, let's say, he has prepared very specific narcissistic, let's say, movie where he was playing himself, showing his depressive mood, and the way how he reacts whenever he cannot, let's say, use an internet. I would say that it was a part of the whole collection of different works, but the people were, let's say, sitting in front of it, watching it from behind, from different angles, and they were looking at it in a very curious way. However, I would say that it was not, let's say, it was not one of his best movies. I was trying to express it by telling him that, oh, well, for Peter, I think that your work is very personal. Yeah, and yeah, it really is, he answered. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that it was a good movie. He usually works well whenever he's working with, let's say, archival old footage, not with, let's say, new media, which are used, which are experimented by him using his own face. But he's doing different projects, and his works are not only, let's say, based on preparing found footage movies, but he also prepares different installations. And this year and last year, he was awarded, let's say, a big prize at the documentary festival in Krakow, called, and he received a prize, The Dragon of the Dragons. And this year he is going to, let's say, finally receive it in his hands at the end of May, 31st of May, where I'm going to also speak few words before, let's say, this ceremony. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Given the time and the fact that we've already exceeded our panel a little, I thank you all very much that you took your time and your ideas and shared them with us. I'm really sure that there is tons of open questions and many new nets to pick and to continue making, maybe connecting. So I really hope this was an interesting and maybe also new perspective for many of you. And I hope you have a nice evening. I hand over back to Lucy.
Yeah, good afternoon and thank you all. I'd like to thank all our panelists and all chairs, moderators, respondents, and also to the audience that we had this great event in the past 2 days. And I very much hope that we will be able to stay in touch within this group for our future collaborations. And also I'd like to thank our technical team for their support in the background, although you can't see them. So thank you very much, you all, and yeah, have a good evening and day, and stay in touch with us. Bye-bye.
Bye.